Have you ever just had a feeling, a gut feeling that what you're being told isn't the whole truth? It's a question that people have been asking for centuries, a warning passed down through generations. Well, today we're going to dive into one of the most ancient warnings of all, a story that became a powerful test for telling truth from fiction. It sounds like something out of a comic book or a fantasy movie, right? But believe it or not, according to ancient accounts, a man actually tried to do this. He saw a power so real, so world-changing, that he thought, hey, I can buy that. And that one move would give a name to a sin that people would argue about for the next 2,000 years. The man's name was Simon Magus. You might know him as Simon the Sorcerer. And his story, which you can find in the New Testament book of Acts, it kind of sets the stage for this much bigger, much more important conversation about truth, deception, and what spiritual power really is. So who was this guy? Well, in the first century, Simon wasn't just some sideshow magician. No, this guy was a huge deal in the city of Samaria. He had an entire population absolutely captivated. So the story from Acts chapter 8 goes like this. Simon's magic was so good, so convincing, that people literally called him the great power of God. But then, his whole world gets turned upside down when an evangelist named Philip shows up. Simon sees real miracles, and he's so blown away that he converts and gets baptized. But that's when things get really interesting. The apostles Peter and John arrive and confer the Holy Spirit on the new believers, and Simon sees this and he wants it. He pulls out his wallet and offers them cash to buy this divine ability. Peter's response was, well, it was brutal. A total shutdown, condemning him for even thinking that a gift from God had a price tag. And that moment, that's his lasting legacy. That one act is what he's remembered for. His name is where we get the word simony, the sin of trying to buy or sell spiritual authority. His story became this foundational warning, a perfect example of someone who saw the power of God but just completely, totally missed the point of where it comes from. But you know, this story about Simon isn't just a random piece of ancient history. It's actually a perfect illustration of a threat that runs through all the source texts we're looking at today. He's the textbook example of a figure that ancient leaders were constantly warning their followers about. And that figure is the false prophet. In the original Greek, it's pseudo-prophetus. And the sources define them as spiritual peddlers of error. I love that phrase. They claim to speak for God, right? But their message, their whole agenda, is coming from somewhere else entirely. They're prophets, sure, but they're also liars, mixing just enough truth in with the lies to be really, really dangerous. And let me tell you, this wasn't some minor side issue. It was a huge, constant concern. Jesus, Paul, Peter, John, Jude. I mean, you go through the foundational texts of Christianity, and the warning is everywhere, over and over again. It's like they're all saying, hey, wherever you find real truth, you can bet a counterfeit is right around the corner. Okay, so if this threat is so common, what are you supposed to do about it? How do you spot the fake? Well, the good news is these texts don't just leave you with a warning. They actually give you a game plan, a framework with 2 critical tests to tell the difference. All right, test number 1, and this is the big one. It has absolutely nothing to do with how popular a teacher is, or how charismatic, or even if they seem to perform miracles. Nope. It cuts right to the very heart of their message. It's all about what they confess, specifically about who Jesus Christ is. I mean, this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's the one Jesus himself asked his own disciples. And the sources basically argue that this is the one question that every single person, and especially every teacher, has to answer. And their answer, it reveals everything. The Apostle John just lays it out in the clearest possible terms. There's really no gray area. He says, look, you can know the Spirit of God because it confesses that Jesus Christ, the divine Son of God, actually became a human being, that he came in the flesh. On the flip side, any spirit that denies that core truth, not from God, period. So the main takeaway here is that theology really, really matters. The specific details of what someone believes about Jesus is presented as the number 1 identifier. Theologian I. Howard Marshall just nails it with this question. It's not enough for someone to just use the name Jesus. This test of confession pushes us to ask, wait a minute, which Jesus are we talking about here? Is this the Jesus from the scriptures, or is this a new version, a different Jesus that's been customized to fit a different message? So that's test number 1, the confession. Now for test number 2, which is a lot more practical, something you can actually see with your own eyes. We're moving from what they say to what they do. Jesus taught that you can recognize a prophet by the real-world results their life and teachings produce.
And he used this simple, brilliant analogy that anyone in his audience would have understood right away. You know a tree by its fruit. It's common sense, right? You don't go looking for grapes on a thorn bush. The end product always reveals what the source really is. And he applied that exact same logic to people.
And this leads us to that classic warning from Matthew's gospel. The danger is all in the disguise. On the outside, they look harmless, gentle, like a sheep. But on the inside, their actual motivation is that of a predator. That word ravenous is pretty strong, but the original Greek word harpax is even more intense. It doesn't just mean hungry. The source material defines it as a predatory heart, someone who will stomp all over justice, righteousness, and compassion just to satisfy their own selfish desires. It describes a character that is fundamentally driven by what they can take for themselves.
And Jesus really drives this point home. He says a healthy tree, just by its nature, produces good fruit. It literally can't produce bad fruit. And of course, the opposite is true for a diseased tree. The fruit is just this inevitable, undeniable billboard for what's going on inside the tree. And in the same way, a person's life, their ethics, the impact they have on other people, that will always eventually show you who they really are.
So here's where you can really see how those two tests, the confession and the fruit, they just click together perfectly. The sources suggest these different spiritual paths are all defined by how they see Jesus. The narrow path confesses him as the Christ, the true Lord. This middle road might use the word Lord, but it's just a title without any real substance. And then you have the broad path, the popular one, which often just waters him down to a good teacher. See? The confession you make determines the path you're on, and that path produces a certain kind of fruit. So at this point, you might be thinking, okay, Simon the Sorcerer, ancient warnings about fruit and trees. This is interesting history, but why should I care about it today? And that is a totally fair question. But the thing is, this issue is maybe more relevant now than it has ever been. Here's the bottom line. That environment of spiritual confusion, it never went away. In fact, you could argue that in our age of information overload, it's just gotten louder and more complicated. There are just as many, if not more, competing ideas about who Jesus was and what he was all about. And I'm not just talking hypothetically. Just look at the dizzying list of ideas about Jesus floating around today. Some scholars call him a subversive sage. A Harvard lecturer mentions students comparing him to political figures like Mao and Stalin. Others claim he was a feminist. You have the whole idea of him marrying Mary Magdalene and having a family. Some just dismiss him as a mistaken prophet. Get this, a recent poll found that a quarter of Americans believed Jesus himself was a sinner. This is the exact kind of confusion the ancient texts were warning us about. And that brings us to a really powerful and kind of challenging final thought from the reformer Martin Luther. What he's saying is, loyalty isn't proven on the easy parts of the battlefield. It's proven right at the point where the fighting is the fiercest. To stand strong everywhere else, but to run away from that one crucial point, that's not loyalty. For the writers we've looked at, that central point, the place where the battle raged, was the identity of Jesus Christ. And so the question they leave for us isn't just who is Jesus, but whether we have the clarity to recognize the real thing in a world full of counterfeits.